Hello everybody, Adam Nicholas here for What Culture Wrestling. It's Monday, and even though it's a bank holiday Monday, that means it's time once again for our big review of this week's episode of The Undertaker's The Last Ride documentary. Yes, the WWE Network documentary series all about The Undertaker. You know the drill by now. So far, we've seen some brilliant documentary stuff about The Undertaker. The last two episodes really unfolded him and all the backstage stuff that's been going on with the dead man for the last couple of years. But this one, admittedly, was a bit slower than usual. So far we've seen a portrait of a man who is desperate for that one last show-stealing performance, and as such it's continued his journey for wanting redemption every time an effort to put on that big match fails and ultimately finds him in this vicious circle. Well, that's kind of where we pick up with him in this episode, although while we did get a lot of deep dives about The Undertaker's emotional, mental state and physical state previous to those matches, this one it's a little bit more of a recap episode, if anything else. For anybody who hasn't really seen much of The Undertaker's matches, probably going to enjoy this episode quite a lot. But for those like myself and a bunch of others who've watched many of Undertaker's bouts over the previous years, this is more of a look at the matches that he's had up to this point kind of episode without as much of the deep dive. Nevertheless, we do still get a little bit of an insight, and we pick up where we left off after that match with John Cena, and we move on towards a match with Triple H at Super Showdown in Australia and all of the little beats that lead up to that point. Some of them are more comical than others, shall we say. Anyway, with that in mind, my name is Adam Nicholas, this is What Culture Wrestling, and these are the 10 things we learned from WWE's Undertaker, The Last Ride, Chapter 3. Number 10. His daughter was mad he beat John Cena. Now, in the previous episode we saw that The Undertaker said he had trained for a match that could have gone 45 minutes, and he ended up getting a match that was 5 against John Cena at WrestleMania 34. Nevertheless, it did a huge deal for his mental health and his overall confidence in himself. He was rejuvenated, even if ultimately he felt like he could have done a lot more. And incredibly, he wasn't the only person who was slightly disappointed with the way the proceedings went down, because his daughter was in the arena for the match with John Cena with Michelle McCool, and they watched on, and she come backstage, and we get this incredibly cute and adorable moment. Dead man comes back. He's just come back and put on a match where he can kind of be happy with it, although he's slightly disappointed with the runtime. He sees his daughter, and she's all like, oh, hello, da-da-da. They go backstage, and as they're walking around, she says, I can't believe Daddy won against John Cena. At which point we see a little cutaway to Michelle McCool, who says that when Taker won, the daughter was a bit like, one thumb up, one thumb down. Yeah for Daddy, but not happy that he beat John Cena. To which the dead man jokes, now I've got to worry about John Cena's feelings too. Which, when you see how serious and sort of down the middle The Undertaker's career has been as the dead man, it's just hilarious to see him. He still has to put up with stuff that every father has to on a daily basis. Number 9. WWE don't acknowledge the Chris Jericho switch. Now, on the road to that match with Triple H at Super Showdown in Australia, The Undertaker had a few matches on the way, and one of those was meant to be a casket match at the Greatest Royal Rumble. Initially though, that match was against Chris Jericho, if you remember, and that was that weird switch where Jericho was out and suddenly Rusev was in. We thought maybe we might get a little bit of an elaboration on this. But somewhat, I guess, slightly predictably, although saying that, Chris Jericho has already appeared as a talking head in this documentary a few episodes previous. You maybe thought we were going to get a bit of an explanation behind that, but we didn't, unfortunately. That was all just completely glossed over. Not just that, the actual match itself was also glossed over too. Now, yes, we have seen recently Rusev and Aiden English actually both leave the company, but I feel like this documentary would have probably been in the bag before then. But even so, the match with Rusev doesn't really focus on the kind of big deal it is for him, or the fact that the dead man and him are working together for the first time, nothing like that. This is kind of just a stepping stone towards the next match. It's a bit of a shame, because you feel like, given the nature of this doc so far, that would have been an interesting talking point that would have kind of drawn a few people in, to be honest, got a few more eyes on it. I know I'd certainly watch it more if I'd heard there was a bit of an anecdote on there regarding that, but I guess with Jericho working in AEW, they maybe decided that wasn't going to be the case, and as such, glossed over the whole thing, which is a shame for Rusev and the match in general, but what are you going to do? Number 8. WWE's MSG gesture meant the world to him. Now, another one of the matches that's on the road towards that Super Showdown match with Triple H is a wonderful main event at Madison Square Garden on July 7th in 2018, where The Undertaker teams up with Roman Reigns and Braun Strowman against Kevin Owens, Elias and Baron Corbin. Now we kind of get the sense that this is a big deal for Taker because it could be the last time that he ever gets a chance to work MSG, never mind just work it, but actually headline as well. And MSG in WWE folklore, in Vince McMahon folklore, is of course the big deal. It's always been their house, if you will, and putting shows on there is the pinnacle of your WWE career. So imagine how big of a deal it is then when the dead man turns up in his cab ready to get into the arena to go for the match, and he sees that Madison Square Garden has been lit up in purple with his image on the side as sort of an homage to him. Vince McMahon decided to put it on as a tribute to show him how much this meant to Vince and how much he means to the company, and you can tell it genuinely fills the dead man full of he's a bit overwhelmed, to be quite honest. He's sitting talking about it and you can see it's such a big deal for him. This match, all right, it's not a huge match in the grand scheme of things, this 6-man tag match, but that's not what it's about. It's about headlining the show, and the dead man is there once again. And while this is, I guess, technically a glorified house show to some extent, you can see the Undertaker is taking it all in because it could well be the last ever time. And he says he actually ends up making eye contact with fans, which he says he never ever does because he really wanted to soak in the moment and the emotion that was happening at the time. Number 7, how he supported Triple H. Now, a strong narrative that goes throughout this episode is the relationship, the bond, the mutual respect between both Undertaker and Triple H, and to a certain extent Shawn Michaels as well. But Taker and Triple H in particular have built up such a relationship over these years. I mean, they've both been doing it since Triple H arrived in 1995 in the company. These two have been coexistent together, and they always see each other across from one another in locker rooms across the world. Literally, they've done it all together, and you can tell that whether they are super good friends outside of the ring or not, that doesn't really matter, because when it comes to the company, these two are about as close as you can get. And we get one nice anecdote that kind of adds towards that, which has been touched on previously in Triple H's documentary. You can find that on the network as well, The King of Kings, or whatever the hell he calls it. Something to do with Triple H being great. I've watched it. It's really good, and also it does give you this tidbit. But for anybody who hasn't seen that, you will learn that when Triple H first started going out with Stephanie McMahon, it was in fact the Undertaker who he went to seek advice regarding the matter. Obviously, it's a difficult situation if you're going out with the daughter of the boss of the company you work for, but ultimately he went to the dead man, asked for some advice, and Taker said, forget the naysayers, man, you know what you bring to the company, I know what you bring to the company. You can tell again that respect shining through, and ultimately he said, just do what you're going to do, and the rest of them are going to say what they're going to say, which ultimately sounds like some pretty sage advice from a man who apparently has been dead for the last however many years. This is a pretty cool moment, and it's fairly sincere, to be honest, because while they both acknowledge they're not like day-to-day buddies, they're not texting each other back and forward all the time trying to keep in touch, but if they ever do need something, they know that they could go to the other person and they would help them out immediately. They say it's a two-way street, and it's cool to see. Number 6, a timeless WrestleMania 28 moment hangs in his home. Now, of course, any wrestling fan worth their salt will know that at WrestleMania 28 we had the end of an era match between Triple H and The Undertaker in a Hell in a Cell. We had Shawn Michaels as the referee. This was supposed to be the end of 3 wonderful careers to a certain extent, and everybody could go off into the sunset, and that would be lovely. Wouldn't that have been nice if that had happened, eh? But yes, from that moment, you'll remember at the end of the match, they all walk up the ramp together and they turn to face the audience, essentially in a modern era curtain call kind of thing, where Undertaker, Triple H and Shawn Michaels are all stood at the top of the ramp, hugging as buddies, and it's lovely. It really is. It's an impactful image, and genuinely one that encapsulates a genuine end of an era. Well, in a lovely touch from Triple H, who decided to have these made together for the 3 guys, we see that in Undertaker's house, on the wall just above his home gym, is this image of the 3 of them at the top of the ramp, along with some, like, a piece of the canvas. I think it's part of Undertaker's glove, some stuff signed as well, a few little trinkets basically from that day. Someone knocking on my door. I think my neighbours are kicking off. I suppose it is only 9:30 on a bank holiday Monday. Here's what it is. The dead man himself says this was one of the most special moments of his career, so it hangs pride and place above his home gym. So every time he has to go and make a comeback or anything of that nature, it's right there to remind him of who he was and the potential that he can still deliver that kind of thing, which, to be fair, it's a pretty good motivator. Number 5, it's worth it just for one promo outtake. Now, as well as leading towards that match against Triple H at Super Showdown, which you'll know ends up leading towards the match at Crown Jewel in 2018, we'll get to that in just a second, this documentary gives you this incredible little outtake, which, if you don't watch anything else in this documentary, you should go and find this because it's absolutely brilliant. During the build towards that match, which is obviously billed as the Brothers of Destruction against D-Generation X, we get a little promo backstage where the brothers are responding to DX's promo earlier in the night where they said that, "Are you ready?" to each other, and then they said, "Suck it," you know, the usual DX tropes. Well, Taker and Kane are backstage, and we get this brilliant moment where Kane delivers his line where he says, "Triple H and Shawn Michaels, you said you had 3 words. Are you ready? Well, we've got 3 words for you." To which the Undertaker then, of course, says, "Go f*** yourselves," which is honestly seeing Kane deadpan it and crotch chop afterwards. It's cool to see the sort of jovial nature they still have, even after all this many years. And it's just this lovely little throwaway backstage outtake, which genuinely is worth watching this whole documentary just for that. I mean, you can't emphasize this enough. These are 2 old guys who've been and done it all. This is literally the mayor of Knox County in Kane who is crotch chopping and the dead man dropping an F-bomb in a backstage promo. I mean, it's just wonderful stuff. This is the kind of thing we wanted during this difficult time, and yours truly absolutely loved it. Number 4, everyone agreed the crown jewel was a train wreck. Now, I realise we're slightly out of order for the narrative of the documentary, but this is the time where we have to talk about that crown jewel match. Now, these are 4 legends of WWE all getting together for one last hurrah in Saudi Arabia for this match at Crown Jewel 2018, and you'd imagine it would just be like putting on an old shoe. It would fit eventually and it would be lovely, and they'd all have a very easy night. As they even say themselves, this should be like a night off. You go in, you do your stuff and you leave. But of course, as we all know, that's not exactly how it went down. Every single person who's involved in this match talks about it, and they all basically say the same thing. This was the drizzling. It was terrible. Triple H calls it a bad comedy movie. Shawn Michaels is seen coming backstage after it basically saying, "We missed by this much," and it like obviously trying to make light of the fact that they all know they stunk the place up. He even says it as much himself. He says it was completely terrible. The Undertaker, you can see, feels almost, well, he even says so, personally responsible for what was going on, because he said he wasn't mentally there. He had some stuff going on at home at the time. All in all, between Kane's mask falling off, actually his mask and his hair falling off, Christ, what a visual that is, Triple H tearing his pec, and ultimately Shawn Michaels nearly killing himself off a moonsault off the turnbuckle. This was just an absolute train wreck, and they say as much in the documentary. What makes it even sadder is that The Undertaker says that if this match had actually gone well, it's one that they could have probably had as maybe his last ever match, because they had high expectations. There should have been 4 guys doing what they do best, and if it had happened that way, he says maybe, just maybe, that would have been enough to ride off into the sunset to. As it happens, it was the exact opposite. Number 3, Taker takes responsibility. Now, as we kind of touched on in that previous entry, The Undertaker very much feels like it was his fault for everything that went wrong at Crown Jewel. Now, we as the viewers kind of know that's not the case. There was a lot of factors going on in there, but I guess this documentary is about him, and he kind of wants to bring on, or certainly project, all the stuff that he's been going through with regards to that Crown Jewel match. I mean, so far we've seen a guy who has taken a lot to prepare himself both physically and mentally to get back in the ring for these matches. It's a toll on his body and mind, and up to this point we've seen he has to be exactly right for things to go well, because let's be honest, he's getting on, he's 50 plus. At this point, he needs to be in the best condition he can be across the board if this is going to work. Now, like we said, he does touch on the fact that he and Michelle had some personal problems back home regarding various family members and stuff, which was completely out of his control, in fairness. But what it does sort of suggest to me a little bit is that maybe the confidence was quite high from all these other matches, and even Triple H saying it himself, it should be like really easy. It should be like a night off, going into the ring and have 4 guys just do what they do. Maybe, to me, it feels like that might have been something that was playing in their heads. They get a little bit cocky, as Han Solo would say. They get too cocky, if anything, and when they get in there, things just don't go quite right. And even the dead man himself says as much. He says it's weird seeing it happen to these 4 guys, because it goes to show you that it can happen to literally anybody. Anyone can have a bad match. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the WWE for. And I guess the biggest exclamation point of this is that really, you can tell there's a sense that he would have happily had this as that final match. He really does seem to want to commit to that. But then the narrative is continuing here that he is chasing the dragon. We have many little cuts away to like Shawn Michaels and Triple H who talk about it as much, basically saying it's a dangerous road to go down, but one that he is very much on. And as we see throughout the documentary, and I imagine throughout the rest of this series, one that he can't seem to get off. Number 2, it's the weakest episode so far. Now, I don't want to be too negative about this episode because genuinely there are some interesting tidbits and anecdotes in there, but ultimately compared to the other two episodes, it's hard not to feel like this one is slightly weaker by comparison. What's really been the drawing factor for me, at least, is that in these documentaries we've seen so much of a deep dive into what was going on in the minds of the performers, particularly The Undertaker, heading in towards these matches and these huge moments, seeing the sort of preparation time that goes into the build-up towards matches. That's the nitty-gritty stuff you're not going to see anywhere else. It's fascinating to watch, really is captivating stuff. But because we kind of go through this episode at such a pace and we touch on so many different matches as like a little whistle-stop tour of the narrative that's like built up towards Triple H and Undertaker at Super Showdown and towards the Crown Jewel matches, we don't get as much time spent with the in-between stuff, which I think, maybe I'm just talking for myself, but I feel like that's what people have come for. And on top of that, something that obviously we know WWE are very prone to do from time to time is to kind of try and rewrite the history a little bit. And yes, the documentary series has been wonderful so far and it's shot beautifully and it's produced amazingly, but we know that they like to try and retell the narrative a bit for the new fans, for the casual viewer, so things look a bit better than they were. They talk about this match with Triple H at Super Showdown like it's this incredibly amazing matchup. All the matches really that we see, that maybe the stuff with Rusev at the Greatest Royal Rumble, we see the stuff with Madison Square Garden in that 6-man tag. We talk about these things like they're huge, big things and that these matches were amazing, but we all know some of them, quite a lot of them actually, were just okay. Ultimately, I felt like this episode was maybe lacking the realism and the sort of down-to-earth nature of the previous ones, even if it was an interesting recap up to this point. And number one, what's on the next episode? However, the good news is that if this episode maybe wasn't up to scratch when it came to all of the in-between stuff, then you can guarantee next week's episode is going to do just that, because we focus on two big and very interesting moments indeed. The dead man missing the card for WrestleMania 35 and being backstage for that is something we're going to dive into, but also we're going to get to break down a little bit of that absolute disaster of a match against Bill Goldberg that the dead man had again over in Saudi Arabia. Even from the tiny clips that we see at the end of episode 3, we can tell that the dead man missing WrestleMania 35 isn't going to sit well with him. He kind of says as much. He says he thinks he's okay about it, and then when he gets there, he realizes, I should have been out there. So there you have it. Those are all the things that we learned from this week's episode of WWE's Undertaker: The Last Ride, Chapter 3. Wow, that's a gobful for anybody who's just woken up on a Monday morning, isn't it? Anyway, let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and share. Hit the old subscribe button if you haven't already. You can find the original article for this at whatculture.com/WWE. That's by Jamie Kennedy. Go and give that a read. You can follow What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow me on Twitter if that's your thing at It's Adam Nicholas. Or if you just want some more videos, there should be some just over here. I've been Adam Nicholas, this has been What Culture Wrestling, and I'll see you next time.